Get up. Now. That seat costs more than your entire bloodline will earn in a lifetime." The words cut through the silence of the luxury cabin, sharper than the winter wind outside. It was Christmas Eve, and Captain Richard Sterling was staring down at the woman in the hoodie with pure contempt. He thought she was the cleaning lady. He thought she was a stowaway. He thought he had the power of a god inside this metal tube. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that the woman he was trying to throw into the cargo hold didn't just buy a ticket she bought the airline. And she was about to teach him a lesson that money can't fix. The tarmac at Teterboro Airport was a desolate sheet of grey ice stretching out into the darkness of the New Jersey night. The wind howled, whipping snow into frantic spirals that danced under the harsh halogen floodlights. It was Christmas Eve, the kind that bit through wool coats and numbed fingers in seconds, but inside the private hangar of Apex Aviation. The air was still and smelled faintly of jet fuel and expensive leather. Miraelle Vance adjusted the strap of her battered canvas duffel bag. She wasn't dressed for the occasion, in a world of cashmere trench coats and Italian leather boots. Miraelle wore a pair of faded denim jeans, beaten-up sneakers that had seen better days, and an oversized charcoal hoodie that swallowed her petite frame. She looked like a college student, heading home for the holidays on a budget bus, not a passenger walking toward a $65 million machine. She walked across the red carpet, laid out on the concrete floor, her eyes fixed on the beast waiting for her. It was a Bombardier Global 7500, the pinnacle of long-range business jets. Its fuselage gleamed white under the hangar lights, a sleek predator of the skies, capable of flying from New York to Hong Kong, without stopping for a breath. The gold stripe running down the side shimmered a subtle nod to the excessive wealth required to even look at such a machine. Miraelle paused at the bottom of the air stairs. She took a deep breath, watching her condensation cloud the air. It had been a long year, a year of shadows, of hiding, of signing documents in back rooms while lawyers argued over the crumbling empire of her late father. She was tired. Her bones felt heavy, weighed down by a grief she hadn't fully processed and a responsibility she hadn't asked for. "Excuse me." The voice came from the top of the stairs. It was sharp, clipped, and devoid of warmth. Miraelle looked up. A flight attendant stood there, looking immaculate in a navy blue uniform that fit a little too perfectly. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a bun, so tight it looked painful, and her name tag read Jessica. She was looking at Miraelle not with curiosity, but with the specific kind of polite suspicion reserved for people who looked like they were in the wrong tax bracket. "Yes," Miraelle said, her voice soft. "Deliveries go to the service entrance on the south side of the hangar," Jessica said, pointing a manicured finger toward a dark corner of the building. "The catering crew is already on board. If you're dropping off the late linens, you're late." Miraelle blinked, a small, tired smile touching her lips. It happened often. People saw the hoodie. They didn't see the woman. "I'm not with catering," Miraelle said, taking a step up the stairs. "I'm on the manifest." Jessica's eyebrows shot up, disappearing behind her bangs. She didn't move out of the way. She stood like a gatekeeper to Olympus, blocking the entrance. She pulled a tablet from her waist, tapping the screen with aggressive precision. "Name, Miraelle," she said. "Just Miraelle." Jessica scrolled. She frowned. She scrolled again. Then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at the screen, then back at Miraelle's sneakers. "Miraelle Vance," Jessica asked the name, tasting foreign in her mouth. "That's me." Jessica hesitated. The manifest clearly listed a Miraelle Vance as the primary passenger for the empty leg flight to London. But in Jessica's world, primary passengers wore Rolexes and smelled like sandalwood and money. They didn't wear hoodies that looked like they were purchased at a thrift store. "I see," Jessica said, though her tone suggested she saw a mistake, not a passenger. She stepped aside, barely giving Mirael enough room to pass without brushing against her uniform. "You can head inside. Take a seat in the rear cabin. The crew will be preparing the main cabin for strictly VIP protocols." Mirael didn't argue. She didn't have the energy. She just wanted to sleep. She nodded and stepped into the warmth of the fuselage. The interior of the Bombardier Global 7500 was breathtaking. It was divided into 4 living spaces. The galley was spacious and gleaming with marble countertops. Beyond that was the club suite, with 4 massive leather armchairs facing each other. Then came the conference suite, with a dining table set for 6. And finally, in the back, the master suite, a private bedroom with a full-sized bed and an ensuite shower. Mirael walked past the galley, feeling the plush carpet sink under her sneakers. She ignored Jessica's instructions to go to the rear. Instead, she stopped in the club suite. It was the most open area, and right now, she just wanted to stretch out. She dropped her duffel bag onto the floor, a sacrilege in this environment, and collapsed into the forward-facing starboard seat. The leather was soft like butter. It smelled new. Mirael closed her eyes, letting the silence of the plane wrap around her. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of peace. But peace on a $70 million jet is a fragile thing. Heavy footsteps clanged against the metal air stairs outside. Heavy, authoritative footsteps. The sound of a man who walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. "Jessica," a deep voice boomed from the entryway. "Why is the APU running so high? I told maintenance to check the bleed air valve." Mirael kept her eyes closed, hoping the storm would pass. It didn't. Captain Richard Sterling ducked his head as he entered the cabin. He was a man cut from the cloth of old-school aviation, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver fox hair that was perfectly coiffed. He wore his uniform not as clothing, but as armor. The 4 gold stripes on his epaulets caught the light, gleaming with authority. He was 55 handsome, in an arrogant sort of way, and he carried himself with the swagger of a man who had flown presidents and rock stars. He brushed the snow off his shoulders, his blue eyes scanning the cabin with critical precision. He spotted Jessica in the galley, who was busy arranging crystal flutes on a tray. "We have a window of 40 minutes before the de-icing crews get backed up." Sterling barked, checking his Breitling watch. "I want wheels up by 2300. Where is the passenger?" The manifest said a Miss Vance. "She's already boarded, Captain," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She tilted her head toward the club suite. "But, well, you'll see." Sterling frowned. He didn't like "you'll see." He liked order. He liked predictability. He walked past the galley, entering the club suite. He stopped dead in his tracks. There in the prime seat, the seat usually reserved for the CEO or the lead principal, slouched a young black woman in a hoodie. Her eyes were closed, her legs were crossed at the ankles, and her dirty sneakers were hovering dangerously close to the mahogany veneer of the side ledge. Her duffel bag looked like a piece of refuse dumped in a palace. Sterling felt a vein in his temple pulse. He had flown for Apex Aviation for 10 years. He had flown Saudi princes who demanded the cabin be kept at exactly 68 degrees. He had flown tech billionaires who wanted to smoke cigars at 40,000 feet. He respected money. He respected class. He did not respect whatever this was. "Excuse me," Sterling said. His voice was a low rumble, designed to intimidate. Mirael didn't jump. She opened one eye slowly as if waking from a pleasant dream. She looked at the man standing over her. "Hello." "You need to move," Sterling said. It wasn't a request. Mirael blinked, fully opening her eyes now. She sat up slightly, pulling her hoodie down. "I'm sorry. I said you need to move," Sterling repeated, stepping closer. He loomed over her, invading her personal space. "This is the principal's seat. This creates a safety hazard for the flight crew during takeoff if you have your luggage blocking the aisle." Mirael looked down at her bag. It was tucked neatly under the seat in front of her. It wasn't blocking anything. "My bag is secured," Mirael said calmly. "And I'm comfortable here." Sterling let out a short, incredulous laugh. He looked back at Jessica, who was watching from the galley with a smirk. He turned back to Mirael, his face hardening. "Listen to me, miss. I don't know who bought your ticket. Maybe you won a contest. Maybe you're the nanny for a family that's coming later. I don't care. But on my ship, there is a hierarchy." He pointed a finger toward the very back of the plane, past the dining table, past the master suite, to the small divan near the rear lavatory, the jump seat area usually used by extra security or overflow staff. "That is where you sit," Sterling commanded. "This area, the club suite, is for VIPs, and frankly, I don't want to have to come out here during the flight and see—" He waved a hand vaguely at her outfit. "This. It lowers the standard of the aircraft." Mirael stared at him. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. For a moment she considered telling him. She could end this right now. She could pull out her phone, open the encrypted email from the board of directors, and show him the signature at the bottom of the acquisition papers. Mirael Vance, owner and chairwoman, Apex Aviation Holdings. But she didn't. She was tired of people like Sterling. Men who judged value by the cut of a suit. She wanted to see how far he would go. "I have a ticket," Mirael said, her voice firming up. "The ticket doesn't assign seats. It charts the whole plane. I can sit where I want." Sterling's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the festive holiday decorations Jessica had put up. He leaned down, placing his hands on the armrests of her chair, boxing her in. "You have a ticket because someone allowed you to have one," he hissed. "You are a guest. A charity case, likely. Now it is Christmas Eve. I want to get to London, and I'm sure you do too. Do not make me call airport security to have you removed for failure to comply with crew instructions, because I will do it. I will drag you off this plane myself if I have to." He stood up straight, adjusting his tie. "The divan in the back. Move. Now. Or you spend Christmas in a holding cell in New Jersey." Mirael looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the fear behind the arrogance. The fear of losing control. "You're making a mistake, Captain," she said quietly. "The only mistake," Sterling sneered, "was letting you up those stairs." Mirael didn't scream. She didn't throw a tantrum. She simply picked up her duffel bag, the canvas scraping softly against the carpet, and walked to the back of the plane. The walk felt like a mile. She passed the mahogany dining table where crystal glassware was already set for a dinner she likely wouldn't be offered. She passed the entrance to the master suite, catching a glimpse of the unmade bed with its Egyptian cotton sheets. Finally, she reached the rear divan. It was a small bench-like seat next to the lavatory door. It was comfortable enough for a short nap, but on a 7-hour transatlantic flight, it was the equivalent of the kids' table at Thanksgiving. She sat down, tossing her bag onto the floor. From her vantage point, she had a clear view of the entire cabin, a straight line of sight all the way to the cockpit door. She pulled her phone out. She had 3 missed messages from her chief legal officer asking if she had landed safely. She typed a quick reply. Boarded. Encountering. Turbulence on the ground. Do not intervene yet. Just as she hit send, the sound of a heavy engine roared outside, muffled by the plane's insulation, but still audible. High beams swept across the hangar floor, blindingly bright through the oval windows. Finally, Captain Sterling muttered, straightening his tie in the mirror of the forward bulkhead. Someone who actually belongs here. A black Mercedes Maybach pulled up to the foot of the stairs, the car gleaming even in the dim light. The driver hopped out, opening the rear door with a flourish. Out stepped a woman who was everything Mireille was not. She was tall, draped in a white faux fur coat that looked like it cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She wore sunglasses at night inside a hangar. Her luggage was a matched set of Louis Vuitton hard-shell cases stacked on a trolley pushed by the driver. This was Tiffany St. Clair, an influencer with 3 million followers known for lifestyle vlogging and dating minor European royalty. Jessica, the flight attendant, practically sprinted to the door, her face transforming from a mask of suspicion to a beaming, eager smile. "Ms. St. Clair," Jessica chirped as Tiffany ascended the stairs, bringing a wave of expensive perfume, something floral and overpowering into the cabin. "Welcome aboard. We are so honored to have you flying Apex tonight." Tiffany pulled down her sunglasses, looking around the cabin with a practiced air of boredom. "God, it is freezing in Jersey. Tell me the champagne is chilled. I've had a day from hell." "Way ahead of you," Jessica said, taking Tiffany's coat and revealing a sparkling cocktail dress that was entirely inappropriate for winter travel, but perfect for Instagram. Captain Sterling stepped out of the cockpit. His chest puffed out. He extended a hand. "Ms. St. Clair." "Captain Richard Sterling. It's a privilege. I've flown a lot of VIPs, but your reputation precedes you." Tiffany offered him a limp hand, barely making eye contact. "Charmed. Just get me to London." "Smooth. Okay, I have a fitting at Harrods at 10. "Consider it done," Sterling said, his voice dripping with charm. "Please take the club suite. Starboard side. Best seat in the house." Tiffany sashayed down the aisle. As she passed the galley, she paused, her eyes catching movement in the back of the plane. She squinted, spotting Mireille sitting on the divan in her hoodie. "Ugh." Tiffany wrinkled her nose. "Who is that?" "Is the cleaning crew still on board?" Sterling let out a low, conspiratorial chuckle. "Apologies, Ms. St. Clair. That is a passenger. A contest winner, or some charity placement, we believe. Corporate books, these empty legs sometimes to fill seats. She's been instructed to stay in the rear and not disturb the paying guests." Tiffany rolled her eyes loud enough for Mireille to hear from 30 feet away. "Great. I hope she doesn't snore. It ruins my aesthetic to have random people in the background of my stories." "She won't make a peep," Sterling promised, shooting a glare toward the back of the plane that clearly said, "or else." "Jessica will close the mid-cabin divider curtain once we're airborne. You won't even know she's there." Mireille watched it all. She watched them stow Tiffany's Louis Vuitton bags in the majestic closet. She watched Sterling personally ensure Tiffany's seat was reclined to the perfect angle. She watched Jessica pour a glass of Dom Perignon 2012, vintage champagne from the owner's private stock, and hand it to the influencer. Mireille looked down at her own hands. She owned the champagne. She owned the seat Tiffany was sitting in. She paid Sterling's salary, which, judging by his watch, was substantial. Enjoy it while it lasts, Mirael whispered to herself, pulling her hood up over her ears. The takeoff was aggressive. Sterling flew the Global 7500 like a fighter jet, banking hard out of Teterboro to avoid the commercial traffic from Newark and JFK. The power of the Rolls-Royce Pearl engines pressed Mirael deep into the divan. It was a magnificent machine, a testament to engineering perfection, even if the man operating it was deeply flawed. Once they leveled off at 41,000 feet, the cabin became a sanctuary of silence. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off. Almost immediately, the smell of warm food wafted back to the divan. Truffle oil, seared steak, freshly baked bread. Mirael's stomach grumbled. She hadn't eaten since a granola bar at 10:00 a.m. Jessica bustled past the mid-cabin divider, which she had indeed drawn halfway closed to obscure Tiffany's view of the riffraff. She was carrying a silver tray. Mirael sat up hopeful. Jessica stopped at the divan. She didn't smile. She placed a small plastic bottle of water and a bag of generic pretzels, the kind you get in economy class on a budget airline, onto the side table. "Dinner service is for the principal guest only," Jessica said flatly. "We weren't catered for extras." Mirael looked at the pretzels. "There is a filet mignon in the fridge labeled Crew Owner Reserve. I know it's there. I saw the invoice." Jessica stiffened. "That is for the captain. And frankly, you should be grateful for the water. Usually non-rev passengers bring their own snacks." Before Mirael could respond, Jessica turned on her heel and marched back to the front, where Tiffany was loudly complaining that her steak was a little too pink. Mirael cracked open the water. She needed to work. She pulled her laptop out of her bag. It was a sleek, high-end machine, contrasting sharply with her clothes. She opened it and tried to connect to the plane's Wi-Fi network, Apex Sky High. It asked for a password. Mirael pressed the call button. A soft chime rang through the cabin. A minute later, Jessica appeared looking annoyed. "Yes, is there a medical emergency?" "No," Mirael said. "I need the Wi-Fi password. I have work to do." Jessica sighed, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "The K-band satellite Wi-Fi is $20 a megabyte. It's billed to the account on file. Captain Sterling has restricted access to authorized users to prevent overages. Ms. St. Clair needs the bandwidth for her live stream." "I can pay for it," Mirael said, reaching for her credit card. "We don't have a card reader." Jessica lied. The lie was so obvious it was insulting. "Just read a magazine. There's an old Golf Digest in the pocket in there." She left again. Mirael felt a heat rising in her chest that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. This was obstruction of business. She had a merger to approve by the time they landed in London. Without Wi-Fi, the deal could stall. She stood up. She was done asking Jessica. She walked up the aisle, pushing past the half-closed curtain. In the club suite, the scene was nauseating. Tiffany was sprawled across 2 seats, her shoes off, recording a video on her phone. Captain Sterling was leaning against the bulkhead, holding a glass of sparkling water, laughing at something she said. "And then he told me," Tiffany giggled at her phone screen, "Babe, the jet is yours. Can you believe it? So here we are, flying private to London for Christmas." She was lying to her followers, implying she owned the plane. Sterling didn't correct her. He just smiled, basking in the reflected glory. They both stopped when they saw Mirael standing there. "I told you to stay in the back." Sterling snapped his smile, vanishing instantly. "What is it now? Toilet clogged. I need the Wi-Fi code, Captain," Mirael said, her voice steady and hard. "Now, it is crucial that I send an email." Sterling set his glass down. He took a step toward her, his face darkening. "Let me explain something to you, sweetheart. This is a $65 million aircraft. The bandwidth is for business, real business, not for you to download movies or text your boyfriend." "I am conducting business," Mirael said. "More business than you realize." "Look at you," Tiffany chimed in, looking Mirael up and down with a sneer. "You look like you're about to rob a convenience store. Captain, can you please make her go away?" "She's ruining my vibe. I'm trying to create content here." "You heard the lady," Sterling growled, moving into Mirael's personal space again. "Go sit down. If I see you up here one more time, I will divert this plane to Gander, Newfoundland, and I will have the RCMP escort you off for interfering with the flight crew. Do you understand me? I will dump you in the snow." Mirael looked at Sterling. She saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. He was certain he was right. He was certain he was powerful. He was certain she was nothing. She memorized his face in that moment. She wanted to remember exactly what he looked like before his world fell apart. "Gander is lovely this time of year," Mirael said coolly. "But that won't be necessary. I'll sit." She turned around and walked back to the divan. She didn't need the Wi-Fi anymore. She had remembered that this specific plane, tail number N750AX, had a hard-wired satellite phone in the rear armrest for emergencies. She sat down, lifted the armrest, and pulled out the handset. It was an old-school, dusty, beige corded phone, rarely used. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Operations," a voice answered on the other end. It was David, the head of Apex Global Operations in New York. "David," Mirael said softly, shielding her mouth with her hand so the crew wouldn't hear. "It's Mirael." "Miss Vance?" David's voice was panicked. "We've been trying to reach you. The pilot went dark on our messages. Is everything okay?" "No," Mirael said, her eyes fixed on the curtain. "Everything is not okay, but we're going to fix it. David, listen to me carefully. I need you to contact the London ground team. I want a full reception committee waiting at Luton, legal, HR, and security." "Of course," David said. "Is there a problem with the aircraft?" "The aircraft is fine," Mirael said, her voice cold as ice. "The problem is the autopilot. I'm going to need to make some manual adjustments to the staff when we land." "Understood," David said. "And Ms. Vance, Merry Christmas." "Not yet, David," Mirael said, hanging up the phone. "But it's about to be." The descent into London, Luton Airport, was rough. A winter storm had settled over the UK, blanketing the home counties in a thick, miserable fog. The Global 7500 buffeted in the crosswinds, its wings flexing as it fought the turbulence. Inside the cabin, the mood was hungover. Tiffany St. Clair had passed out hours ago after finishing the bottle of Dom Perignon. She was currently snoring lightly in the club suite, a sleep mask emblazoned with the words, "Do not disturb," covering her eyes. In the back, Mirael hadn't slept. She had spent the last 5 hours staring out the window at the black abyss of the Atlantic, her mind sharpening like a blade. She had reviewed the employee contracts on her laptop offline since she was denied Wi-Fi, and made notes. She had drafted the termination letters in her head. The intercom crackled to life. "Good morning, Ms. St. Clair," Captain Sterling's voice boomed, deliberately ignoring the other passenger. "We are beginning our initial descent into London Luton. The weather is a bit British grey and windy, but I'll have you on the ground in 20 minutes. I've radioed ahead for your car to be brought tarmac side." Jessica appeared from the galley looking dishevelled but determined to maintain the facade of exclusivity. She walked past the sleeping Tiffany and approached Mirael in the rear. Wake up! Jessica snapped, though Mirael was wide open-eyed. Put your seatbelt on, and clean up this mess. She pointed to the empty water bottle and the pretzel wrapper on the side table. I'm not the cleaning crew, Jessica, Mirael said calmly, fastening her belt. You might as well be, Jessica muttered, snatching the trash. Listen, when we land you wait. Ms. St. Clair deplanes first, then the captain, then me, then you. We don't want you cluttering up the stairs while the paparazzi are snapping photos of our VIP. Paparazzi? Mirael asked, raising an eyebrow. Ms. St. Clair posted that she was landing. There will be press. So hood up, head down, and try not to look like a hobo. It reflects poorly on the brand. Mirael almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. Don't worry, Jessica. I think the press will be very interested in who gets off this plane. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud and a mechanical whine. The plane banked sharply, aligning with the runway. Mirael felt the familiar pull of gravity. It felt like Judgment Day. The wheels slammed onto the wet tarmac of Luton, the reversers roaring as Sterling braked aggressively, throwing Mirael forward against her seatbelt. The plane slowed, turning off the main runway and taxiing toward the private terminal known as the FBO Fixed Base Operator. Specifically, they were heading to Harrods Aviation, the premier private jet terminal in London. The green and gold signage glowed in the mist. As the plane came to a halt, Mirael looked out the window. Usually for a standard charter, there would be a fuel truck and maybe a black sedan or two. Today, the tarmac looked like a presidential motorcade. There were 4 black Range Rovers with tinted windows, 2 police motorcycles, and standing right at the red carpet line was a group of 6 men in dark wool coats holding umbrellas. They weren't ground crew. They were suits. Wow, Tiffany said, waking up and peering out to the window as she stretched. My publicist really outdid herself. Look at that welcome committee. Captain Sterling emerged from the cockpit, buttoning his blazer, a triumphant smile on his face. Looks like you have quite the fan club, Ms. St. Clair. Allow me to escort you down. He didn't even look at the back of the plane. He opened the main cabin door, and the damp, freezing air of London rushed in. Showtime, Mirael whispered. Captain Sterling stood at the top of the air stairs, chest puffed out, breathing in the cold air. He loved this part. The arrival, the moment where he looked like the commander of a starship. He extended a hand to Tiffany St. Clair, who was adjusting her faux fur coat and checking her makeup in her phone camera. Watch your step, my dear, Sterling cooed. They descended the stairs together, a picture of manufactured glamour. Jessica followed a few steps behind, carrying Tiffany's smaller vanity case like a loyal servant. At the bottom of the stairs, the group of men in suits waited. They were stone-faced. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They didn't hold up signs asking for autographs. Tiffany reached the bottom and struck a pose, waiting for the flash of cameras. None came. She lowered her sunglasses, confused. Hi. Are you guys with Daily Mail? The man in the center stepped forward. He was an older British man with steel-grey hair and glasses, wearing an impeccable trench coat. This was Arthur Henderson, the regional director of Apex Aviation Europe. He was a man who did not smile unless he was looking at a balance sheet that was up 20%. Sterling recognized him immediately. His confident swagger faltered. Mr. Henderson, sir, I wasn't expecting the regional director to meet us on Christmas morning. This is an honor. Sterling reached out to shake Henderson's hand. Henderson did not take it. He kept his hands deep in his coat pockets. Captain Sterling, Henderson said, his voice crisp and devoid of holiday cheer. You are 3 minutes late to the block. Headwinds, sir. Sterling stammered, his smile flickering. "And we had to navigate around the storm front, but I assure you the flight was smooth. Ms. St. Clair here was extremely satisfied." Tiffany waved a hand. Yeah, it was fine. Can someone grab my bags? I'm freezing." Henderson ignored Tiffany completely. He looked past Sterling, past Jessica, his eyes fixing on the open door of the plane at the top of the stairs. "Where is she?" Henderson asked. Sterling blinked. "Where is who?" The passenger." "Oh, the non-rev in the back. She's waiting on board, sir. I instructed her to hold back so she wouldn't interfere with the VIP protocol." Sterling chuckled nervously. "You know how it is with the free riders. Didn't want her cluttering the red carpet." Henderson's face went pale. The other 5 men in suits shifted uncomfortably. They looked at Sterling like he was a man standing on a landmine who had just decided to jump up and down. "You instructed her to wait," Henderson repeated slowly. "Yes, sir, for security and aesthetics." At that moment, a figure appeared in the doorway of the plane. Mirael stood there. She had zipped her hoodie up to her chin against the wind. Her duffel bag was slung over her shoulder. She looked down at the group, at Tiffany, shivering in her dress, at Jessica clutching the vanity case, at Sterling, sweating despite the cold. She began to walk down the stairs. Sterling turned his face flushing with anger. He barked up at her. "I told you to wait. Get back inside until we clear the area." He actually took a step up the stairs to block her path. "Richard," Henderson shouted. It was a command loud and sharp like a gunshot. "Step away from the stairs. Now!" Sterling froze, looking back at his boss in confusion. "Sir, she's just... Step away." Henderson's voice was shaking with suppressed rage. Sterling slowly backed down, confused. Mirael continued her descent. Her sneakers hit the red carpet. She dropped her heavy duffel bag on the ground with a thud right next to Tiffany's Louis Vuitton stack. The moment her feet touched the ground, the dynamic of the universe shifted. Arthur Henderson, the regional director who terrified pilots across the continent, bowed. It wasn't a nod. It was a formal, respectful bow. "Ms. Vance," Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly. "Welcome to London. On behalf of the entire European board, I offer my sincerest apologies for the lack of reception you seem to have encountered on board." The other 5 suits immediately bowed their heads in unison. "Welcome, Ms. Vance." Silence descended on the tarmac, heavier than the fog. Sterling looked at Henderson. Then he looked at Mirael. His brain was trying to process the data, but it was returning a fatal error. Vance Mirael. Vance. He remembered the name on the manifest. He remembered the name on the tail of the plane he had been flying for 10 years. Apex Aviation, a subsidiary of the Vance Group. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tiffany St. Clair, not being the sharpest tool in the shed, broke the silence. "Wait. Who is she? Why are you bowing to the hoodie girl?" Mirael ignored Tiffany. She looked directly at Captain Sterling. Her eyes were dark and hard. "Captain," Mirael said softly, "you mentioned earlier that there is a hierarchy on your ship." Sterling swallowed hard. He felt like he was drowning. Miss Vance, I didn't know." "You said," Mirael continued, stepping closer to him, "that the club suite is for VIPs, and that my presence lowers the standard of the aircraft." She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the flight manifest she had taken from the cockpit door on her way out. She held it up. "It seems you misread the manifest, Richard. You saw a hoodie and assumed charity case. You didn't bother to check the ownership structure of the company that signs your paychecks. Jessica, standing behind Sterling, dropped the vanity case. It hit the ground with a crack. Her hands flew to her mouth. "You own," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "You own the airline." "I own the airline," Mirael corrected. "I own the plane. I own the fuel in the wings. I own the hangar we are standing in front of. And until about 5 minutes ago, I owned your contracts." Mirael turned to Henderson. "Arthur." "Yes, ma'am." "Captain Sterling and flight attendant Jessica are relieved of duty effective immediately," Mirael said, her voice ringing out in the cold air. "They are not to re-enter the aircraft. Their personal effects can be mailed to them. Please have security escort them off my property." "Understood," Henderson said. He signaled to the security guards by the Range Rovers. "Wait!" Sterling panicked, his arrogance dissolving into desperate pleading. He reached out toward Mirael. "Ms. Vance, please. It's Christmas. I've been with Apex for 10 years. I have a pension. You can't just... You threatened to dump me in Newfoundland." Mirael cut him off, her voice icy. "You denied me food on my own plane. You humiliated me to impress a guest who doesn't even pay full price." She looked at Tiffany. "And as for you," Mirael said. Tiffany shrank back into her fur coat. I didn't do anything. I just sat there." "You laughed," Mirael said. "And you used my Wi-Fi to lie to your followers." Mirael turned back to Henderson. "Arthur, send an invoice to Ms. St. Clair's agency for the full charter price of this flight. No influencer discount. Full retail. Plus the catering she consumed." Tiffany gasped. That's $40,000. "Merry Christmas," Mirael said dryly. 2 large security guards stepped forward, flanking Sterling and Jessica. Sterling looked at the plane, his beautiful, beloved jet, one last time. He looked at Mirael, the woman in the dirty sneakers he had tried to bully. He realized with a sickening thud in his stomach that he had judged the book by the cover, and the book had just closed on his career. "Get them out of my sight," Mirael said, picking up her duffel bag. As the security guards dragged a protesting Sterling and a sobbing Jessica toward the exit gate, not a limo, but the pedestrian gate. Mirael looked at Henderson. "Arthur, I'm tired. Is the car warm?" "Heated seats are on Ms. Vance," Henderson said, opening the door to the lead Range Rover. Mirael slid into the back seat, the leather warm and welcoming. She watched through the tinted glass as Sterling was shoved out into the cold grey street of Luton, standing in the snow with nothing but his uniform and his regret. Karma hadn't just hit back. It had landed the plane. The heavy thud of the Range Rover's door sealing shut was the most beautiful sound Mirael Vance had heard in 6 months. It was a solid, dull thump that instantly severed the connection between her and the freezing, hostile world outside. The interior of the car was a different universe. It smelled of conditioned leather and faint citrus. The heated seats began to seep warmth into her frozen back, thawing the chill that had settled in her bones during the confrontation on the tarmac. Through the thick tinted glass, she watched the scene recede. Captain Richard Sterling was still standing there, a solitary figure in a navy blue coat, looking small and pathetic against the backdrop of the massive jet he used to command. Next to him, Jessica was weeping into her hands, while security guards gestured firmly toward the pedestrian exit. They looked like ghosts. Ghosts of a past Mirael had just exorcised. The convoy of SUVs began to move, gliding smoothly away from the private terminal and merging onto the wet, dark roads leading toward central London. The silence in the car was thick, heavy with things unsaid. Arthur Henderson sat in the front passenger seat. He was a man who had negotiated contracts with oil barons and royal families. Yet right now the back of his neck was flushed red. He sat rigidly staring straight ahead, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap. "You can breathe, Arthur," Mirael said softly, her voice breaking the tension. "I'm not going to fire you." Arthur let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. He turned in his seat, his face a mask of professionally controlled panic. "Miss Vance, I cannot express how deeply humiliated I am on behalf of the European branch, that you of all people were treated like a vagrant on your own flagship aircraft. It is a failure of leadership, my failure." Mirael looked out the window. The drab industrial outskirts of Luton were giving way to the glowing arteries of the M1 highway. Rain streaked the glass, fracturing the streetlights into starbursts. "It wasn't just me, Arthur," she said, her eyes still on the road. "That's the part that bothers me. Sterling didn't just wake up today and decide to be a tyrant. He was too comfortable. He had a system. The way he blocked the aisle, the way Jessica sneered. That was practiced behavior. How many other people have they treated like that? How many paying clients? How many staff members?" Arthur hesitated. We have had complaints. In the past." Mirael turned her gaze to him. It was sharp, dissecting. And we prioritized efficiency," Arthur admitted, his voice dropping. "Sterling was a technically gifted pilot. His fuel economy numbers were top tier. His flight times were always ahead of schedule. In this industry, we tend to tolerate strong personalities if they deliver on the metrics. We called it pilot's God complex. We thought it was harmless." "Harmless?" Mirael repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. "He denied me food. He threatened to divert the plane and dump me in Newfoundland because he didn't like my hoodie. If I were actually a student or a contest winner, or just someone without power, I would be sitting in a Canadian police station right now." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. "Cruelty is never harmless, Arthur. It is a rot, and rot spreads. If the captain treats people like garbage, the flight attendant thinks it's okay. If the flight attendant thinks it's okay, the ground crew stops caring. And eventually the metal starts to rust." Arthur nodded, looking suitably chastised. "You are your father's daughter. He used to say something very similar about the shipping containers. If you don't paint the scratches, the whole ship sinks." Mirael smiled faintly at the mention of her father. "He also said never trust a man who kicks a dog." She sat back. "I want a full audit, Arthur, not of the finances. I know the numbers are good. I want a cultural audit. I want to know which pilots are screaming at the catering staff. I want to know which managers are ignoring harassment complaints because the perpetrator brings in revenue. We are purging the rot. Tonight was just the first cut." "I will assemble the HR task force in the morning," Arthur promised, tapping a note into his phone. "It will be scorched earth." "Good." The car slowed as they entered the city proper. London at Christmas was a sight to behold. Regent Street was a canopy of golden angels, their wings spanning the width of the road, glowing against the night sky. The sidewalks were packed with last-minute shoppers, bundles of bags in their hands, their breath puffing in the cold air. It looked magical. But Mirael felt a vibration in her pocket. She pulled out her phone. It was a notification from Instagram. Despite the no Wi-Fi block on the plane, Tiffany St. Clair had evidently found a signal the moment they touched down. Mirael opened the app. There was a new story posted 3 minutes ago. It was a video of Tiffany standing in the back of a black taxi, tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. The caption read, "Worst Christmas ever. Apex. Aviation left me stranded in London after treating me like trash. Boycott this airline. Hashtag horror story. Nampad Apex sucks." Mirael watched the video. In it, Tiffany was sobbing. "They kicked me out because I stood up for a homeless girl. The pilot was a monster, and then some random woman claimed she owned the plane and threw me out. I'm freezing and I have nowhere to go." Mirael let out a dry laugh. "Unbelievable." "What is it?" Arthur asked. Mirael turned the phone screen toward him. "Our VIP is trying to spin the narrative. She's playing the victim. She says she was defending me." Arthur's face hardened. The deferential employee vanished, replaced by the ruthless executive who managed $1 billion fleet. "That is libel, and a breach of the NDA she signed when she booked the charter. Shall I have legal issue a cease and desist?" "No," Mirael said calmly. "A cease and desist is boring. She wants attention. Let's give her the truth." Mirael tapped her screen, drafting a quick email to the Apex social media team. "Release a statement," Mirael dictated as she typed. "Official response to Ms. St. Clair. State that she was removed from the flight for violating safety protocols and participating in the harassment of another passenger. Attach the time-stamped cabin audio logs if you have to. I know the cockpit voice recorder picks up the galley." She paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "And Arthur leak the invoice." Arthur blinked. "The invoice, the one I told you to send her, $40,000. Leak the bill to TMZ or whoever covers people like her. Let the world see that the victim was flying on a plane she couldn't afford, drinking champagne she didn't pay for while bullying the woman who signed the check." Arthur allowed himself a small, shark-like smile. "That is devastatingly effective. It will destroy her credibility within the hour." "She wanted a show," Mirael said, locking her phone and sliding it back into her pocket. "Now she has one." The car turned onto Park Lane, the tires crunching softly on the gravel driveway of the Dorchester. The hotel rose like a fortress of warmth and civility, its golden lights reflecting off the wet pavement. This was the London Mirael knew, the London of hushed tones, deep carpets, and absolute discretion. As the convoy came to a halt, the doormen sprang into action. They were dressed in long green coats and top hats, their movements precise and respectful. One of them opened Mirael's door before the vehicle had even fully settled. "Good evening, madame," the doorman said, offering a gloved hand. He didn't look at her hoodie. He didn't look at her sneakers. He looked her in the eye. "Welcome to the Dorchester." Mirael took his hand and stepped out. The cold air bit at her face one last time, but it had lost its teeth. She was safe now. Arthur was at her side instantly, gesturing to the hotel manager, who was waiting under the awning, flanked by 2 assistants. "Ms. Vance," the manager said, bowing deeply, "it is a profound honor. We were informed of your difficult journey. Please allow us to escort you directly to the Harlequin suite. We have taken the liberty of preparing a light supper, smoked salmon, and a warm pot of Earl Grey. And of course the fireplace is lit." Mirael looked at them. This was service, not the sneering condescension of Jessica or the arrogant blustering of Sterling. This was the dignity of doing a job well. "Thank you," Mirael said, her voice thick with sudden emotion. "That sounds perfect." She began to walk toward the revolving doors, her battered duffel bag still slung over her shoulder. An assistant reached for it. "May I take that for you, Miss Vance?" Mirael hesitated. She gripped the canvas strap tight. That bag held her laptop, her father's files, and the clothes she had worn while she was invisible. "No," Mirael said gently. "I've got it. It reminds me of where I came from." They walked through the lobby, a cathedral of marble and floral arrangements. A massive Christmas tree dominated the center of the room, smelling of pine and nostalgia. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns turned to look. They saw the manager, the director of an airline, and a retinue of staff surrounding a young black woman in a hoodie. They didn't whisper about her clothes. They whispered about her power. They knew that in this world, if you could dress like that and walk with the manager, you were the most important person in the room. They reached the private elevator. Arthur held the door open. "Miss Vance," Arthur said quietly. "About the ground crew at Luton, the men who were standing outside in the rain, waiting for the plane to park." "Yes." "I'll process the double salary bonus as you requested, but surely you want to wait until the morning. It's late." Mirael shook her head. "No, do it now. Tonight. I want them to wake up on Christmas morning and see that notification in their bank accounts. I want them to know that while the pilot was warm and dry, I saw them standing in the cold. I saw them doing the work." Arthur looked at her with a newfound respect that went beyond her job title. "You really are the new owner, aren't you? Your father would be very proud." "Good night, Arthur," Mirael said. "Good night, Miss Vance." The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the lobby. Mirael was alone. She watched the floor numbers tick upward. 1, 2, 3. Penthouse. When the doors opened, she stepped into the Harlequin suite. It was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Hyde Park and the London skyline. A fire crackled in the marble hearth. The promised tea and salmon were waiting on a silver tray. Mirael walked to the window and looked out at the city, somewhere out there in the cold. Richard Sterling was likely sitting in a pub nursing a pint, and his wounded ego telling anyone who would listen that he was a victim of woke politics rather than his own hubris. Somewhere out there, Tiffany was frantically deleting comments as the internet turned against her. Mirael dropped her duffel bag onto the plush carpet. She unzipped her hoodie and pulled it off, tossing it onto one of the silk armchairs. Underneath, she wore a simple white t-shirt. She walked to the bathroom, which was clad in pink marble, and turned on the tap. She splashed cold water on her face, washing away the grime of New Jersey, the stale air of the cabin, and the toxicity of the flight. She looked up at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, but they were clear. For the first time since her father died, she didn't feel like a little girl playing dress-up in his boardroom. She had faced a bully and won. She had protected her company. She had upheld her values. She picked up the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. "Front desk, how may we help you?" "This is Mirael Vance in the penthouse," she said, her voice strong and steady. "Please send up a bottle of champagne, not Dom Perignon. Send me something authentic, something real." "Right away, Miss Vance." Mirael hung up the phone and walked back to the window. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cold of London on the other side, unable to touch her. She was the billionaire who owned the plane. But more importantly, she was the woman who had remembered that the pilot is nothing without the passenger. And that is the story of how Captain Sterling learned the most expensive lesson of his life: never judge a passenger by their hoodie. He thought he was the king of the sky, but he forgot that even kings have to answer to the person who owns the castle. Mirael Vance didn't just fire a bad pilot. She proved that true class isn't about what you wear or how much you shout. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Sterling and the influencer were left out in the cold while Mirael enjoyed a Christmas victory that money alone couldn't buy. If you enjoyed this story of hard karma and justice being served, ice cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone because of how you looked? Tell me your story in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.